They told you it was Swiss-made. But what if I told you your $20,000 Rolex was born in a fluorescent-lit factory in China, on the same assembly line as a $200 knockoff? For decades, the luxury watch industry has sold us dreams of old Swiss men hunched over velvet workbenches, handcrafting masterpieces tick by tick. But behind the scenes, it's a different story, one that insiders are finally exposing. We're talking hidden factories, rebranded replicas, and a marketing illusion so slick it makes your overpriced timepiece feel more like a scam than a status symbol. Buckle up because the tea is boiling and Rolex just got caught adjusting prices mid-scandal. Let's unravel the real origin of your favorite luxury watches and why the Swiss are quietly panicking. They sell you a fantasy, polished oak showrooms, precision tools glinting under artisan hands, and timepieces passed down through generations like royal bloodlines. Swiss-made, those two words are supposed to whisper legacy, exclusivity, and mechanical perfection. You picture old money elegance, maybe even James Bond checking his Rolex between missions. But what if I told you that the heart of this billion-dollar fantasy doesn't beat in Geneva, but in a fluorescent-lit factory outside Shenzhen? That behind every crafted in Switzerland label, there's a quiet truth. Up to 95% of the parts in your luxury watch were actually made in China. And here's the kicker. Insiders are finally talking. Quiet whispers from anonymous whistleblowers, leaked shipping records, and secret contracts that brands hoped would never see the light of day. You want to know what Swiss-made really means? Stick around. Forget Geneva. If you really want to see where the world's watches are born, you need to head to Shenzhen, the sprawling, industrial heart of southern China. Here, towering factory complexes operate around the clock, not just churning out knockoffs for street vendors, but manufacturing components for the very brands that swear by Swiss prestige. We're not talking about cheap fakes. We're talking about high-grade bezels, sapphire crystal glass, precision movements, and intricate bracelet links. The same exact parts you'll find inside a five-figure Rolex or Omega. And here's where it gets messy, eh? Some of these factories, they play both sides. By day, they fulfill quiet orders for legitimate Swiss companies looking to cut costs. By night, those same machines, those same technicians, pump out near-identical replicas, sometimes using leftover stock from the real deals. It's a shadow industry that thrives in legal gray zones and NDA-covered supply chains. And it's not a fluke. It's a feature of how the modern luxury watch industry really works. Let's talk about the myth of the Swiss-made label. Those two words that supposedly guarantee old-world craftsmanship, alpine precision, and a price tag to match. But peel back the layers, and you'll find that the truth is far less romantic and a lot more profitable. According to Swiss law, a watch can legally be labeled Swiss-made if just 60% of its total value is deemed to be of Swiss origin. But here's the catch. Value doesn't mean parts. It means money. That includes marketing, branding, assembly, and even the postage to ship it back from China. Let that sink in. A company could design the watch in Switzerland, outsource nearly every component, from the case to the crown to the crystal, to factories in Shenzhen or Guangzhou, and then fly those parts back to Switzerland. Once the movement, often the only piece that's even partially Swiss, is inserted in a clean, sterile Geneva lab, voila! It's now magically Swiss-made. It's like buying a pizza from Domino's, sprinkling a pinch of truffle dust on top in Italy, and calling it authentic Neapolitan cuisine. But it gets more insidious. Some brands stretch the definition even further by commissioning Chinese manufacturers to pre-assemble almost the entire watch, case, dial, bracelet, hands, glass, everything. These watches arrive in Switzerland 95% complete, and a technician will then drop in a Swiss movement. Sometimes even that's pre-assembled and screw down the case back. That final step, the movement insertion, is enough to pass legal muster. And just like that, a $70 watch made for pennies in Shenzhen is marked up to $7,000 and sold as a legacy piece of European heritage. What's worse is how this loophole has been aggressively defended. Swiss watch lobbyists have fought tooth and nail to keep this 60% value rule intact. Why? Because increasing that requirement would force brands to either raise costs or reveal just how many of them are already exploiting overseas labor. And guess who gets fooled in the end? The consumer. You think you're buying centuries of horological tradition. What you're really buying is a brand, a logo, and a legal technicality, all propped up by the illusion of European exclusivity, while the real work is happening thousands of miles away on an assembly line in Asia. This isn't craftsmanship. This is capitalism dressed in a Swiss watch box. If you thought the Swiss-made label loophole was unsettling, wait until you hear from the people who actually built your so-called luxury watch. Because behind every gleaming Rolex, every polished Omega, every Patek Philippe advertised as pure Swiss heritage, there are whispers from inside the factories. And now some of those whispers are coming out loud and clear. Former industry workers are beginning to speak, and they're blowing the lid off a global illusion. Let's start with Mr. L, a former quality control technician who worked for a parts supplier in Shenzhen for over a decade. According to him, we made cases and bracelets for 3 major Swiss brands. Sometimes they would send blueprints with Swiss brand logos already printed on the molds. There was no attempt to hide it. The instructions were, make it a spec, make it fast, and don't ask questions. He shared photos, real receipts, of raw watch dials stacked in factory bins, already labeled Swiss-made. These weren't cheap knockoffs. They were identical to what you'd find in boutique shops in Zurich or Beverly Hills, sold under a halo of prestige. And yet, their journey started in the industrial maze of Guangdong. One file included high-resolution images of luxury cases engraved with serial numbers and official logos, fresh off the CNC machines, with shipping labels addressed to Geneva, Switzerland. No middleman, no aliases, just a direct pipeline from Chinese steel to Swiss branding. Then there's Jean, a former employee of a mid-sized Chinese factory contracted by a well-known Swiss heritage brand. She worked in final assembly, fitting bezels and polishing cases. We were told not to talk about it online. They paid us double during holidays. I thought I was making replicas at first, but then I saw the exact watches in duty-free stores at the airport. Even more shocking, these aren't just modern tricks. Collectors are now discovering that even vintage Swiss watches, yes, even from the golden eras of the 70s and 80s, were using outsourced parts. One retired horologist who worked in the Jura Mountains during the 1980s admitted, "We used to import finished bracelets from Hong Kong. No one cared. As long as it passed final inspection here, it was Swiss. That's how it's always been." He even revealed that, back then, some brands would pre-age Chinese-made parts to make them look handmade or patinated. The goal was to maintain the illusion, keep the story going. It wasn't just a marketing campaign. It was a carefully orchestrated performance, sold to buyers as tradition. Some of these vintage timepieces now go for tens of thousands at auction, hailed as relics of European craftsmanship, when in reality, the components were traveling farther than the people who buy them. And here's the most damning part. Some brands didn't even know. Many outsourced production to third-party Swiss suppliers, who in turn subcontracted to Chinese factories, without disclosing it. So when a Swiss executive says, "Our watches are made here," they might be telling the truth. They just don't know the whole supply chain. Now, with insiders sharing receipts, leaked shipping documents, and photos from factory floors, the cracks are no longer rumors. They're real, provable fractures in the pristine glass dome of the luxury watch world. So the next time someone flexes a $10,000 timepiece and calls it Swiss excellence, ask them one question. Which part of China was it made in? So, with all these receipts, with all this evidence, why isn't anyone talking about it? Why aren't the headlines screaming? Swiss luxury watch industry outsources to China? Simple. Follow the money. Mainstream luxury magazines, the glossy giants like GQ, Esquire, Robb Report, Hodinkee, aren't just media outlets. They're billboards, funded almost entirely by ad dollars from the very brands they're supposed to be covering. Rolex, Omega, Tag Heuer, Patek. These companies don't just buy ads, they buy silence. One former fashion editor from a major men's magazine told us off the record, "We had a blacklist. You couldn't question the origin of a watch if that brand had a full-page ad in the issue." That's just how it worked. The reviews were basically paid for puff pieces. Look at any watch editorial spread. You'll see polished language like unmatched craftsmanship and time-honored Swiss traditions. What you won't see, a single mention of Shenzhen, Dongguan, or even made in China. Why? Because calling out that truth means risking millions in advertising revenue. It means being cut off from exclusive product access and luxury sponsorships. And that brings us to the influencers. These days, luxury brands don't just court journalists. They wine and dine influencers. Think of the YouTubers who unbox $30,000 watches, or the Instagrammers always jet-setting to Geneva for brand immersion trips. Those aren't vacations. They're bribes with velvet ropes. Several content creators admit off-camera, "We can't say anything negative. If you do, you're out. No more free watches. No more backstage passes. No more clout. It's a golden leash, and most wear it proudly." But here's where the story takes a turn. TikTok, Reddit, YouTube Shorts. That's where the cracks are forming. Because unlike polished watch journalists and paid influencers, anonymous insiders don't care about brand access. Former factory workers, supply chain managers, even junior employees from inside the Swiss offices themselves. They're leaking footage, posting documents, naming names. We're seeing TikToks with millions of views breaking down how a Swiss-made watch is 80% Chinese assembly. Reddit threads dissecting serial numbers that trace back to factories in Guangdong. Whistleblower accounts posting side-by-side comparisons of official and OEM parts, and they're identical. These aren't conspiracy theories. These are receipts, uploaded by people who have nothing to gain and everything to expose. And the industry knows it. That's why we're seeing an uptick in legal threats, takedown notices, and whisper campaigns. But the toothpaste is out of the tube. The truth is spreading. And unlike a print ad, you can't pay to shut down a viral TikTok. So the next time you see a glowing article about Swiss legacy, ask yourself, was this journalism or just another commercial wrapped in a $5,000 leather strap? Because when it comes to luxury watches, the media isn't silent by accident. It's silent because someone paid them to be. Let's talk about something Rolex never does: drop prices. Rolex is the master of controlled scarcity. Waiting lists. Authorized dealers who can't sell you a Submariner without a 2-year relationship. Pre-owned models that sometimes cost more than retail. That's their whole brand. Exclusivity, stability, prestige. So why, in 2024 and now into 2025, are we suddenly seeing prices falling across the board? Let's look at the receipts. The once unattainable Rolex Daytona, which fetched $40,000 on the resale market, is now being listed closer to $28,000, even less in some cases. The Submariner date has dropped below $12,000, sometimes closer to retail. Models that were once impossible to get without paying triple. The GMT Master 2 Pepsi, the Explorer 2, even the Sky Dweller, are now sitting unsold on luxury reseller platforms. But here's where it gets wild. These drops didn't happen randomly. They started just weeks after a series of viral exposés hit TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram. Videos showing identical Rolex-style cases and bracelets being produced in Shenzhen and Dongguan, right next to replica parts. Factory workers anonymously shared clips of production lines manufacturing parts claimed to be OEM, original equipment manufacturer, for the same suppliers that deal with major Swiss brands. And suddenly, the aura cracked. Not for hardcore watch collectors, maybe, but for casual luxury buyers. The ones dropping 5 figures for status, not heritage. And they started asking dangerous questions. If 80% of the case is made in China, why am I paying for Swiss craftsmanship? If this bracelet is indistinguishable from the replica, what am I really buying? Rolex felt that ripple. Quietly, behind the curtain. No flashy PR. No official statements. But the gray market, where Rolex carefully maintains its mystique, started seeing a slow flood of inventory. Insiders from European authorized dealers confirmed, "We've been told to move stock. Discreetly. Get the watches out the door without triggering headlines." In other words, a control burn. Because if the public perception shifts too fast, the entire luxury illusion collapses. And Rolex knows that once something stops being aspirational, it becomes negotiable. And once it's negotiable, it stops being a Rolex. The brand can't afford a scandal, but it also can't afford unsold stock. So they're walking a tightrope. Reduce prices without admitting anything's wrong. But for those watching closely, the message is clear. This isn't just a market correction. It's a quiet panic, a scramble to preserve prestige while the truth leaks out. Because when even Rolex, the most bulletproof name in watches, is forced to adjust its crown, you know the empire is starting to crack. While Rolex and Omega fight to protect their spotless image, a quiet revolution is brewing beneath the surface. The rise of the parallel build market. And trust me, it's already bigger than you think. Here's the twist. People are no longer just buying knockoffs. They're building their own watches with parts from the exact same factories that supply luxury brands. Let's break it down. In the watch world, you'll hear terms like homage OEM and same line. These aren't bootlegs from shady street vendors. These are legitimately machined cases, bezels, bracelets, and even movements sourced directly from the same Chinese factories that mass-produce parts for supposed Swiss watches. Homage means it looks like a Rolex or Omega, but has no logo. Think of it as a tribute piece, legal, unbranded, but high quality. OEM stands for Original Equipment Manufacturer, factories that actually supply parts to real brands. Yes, even luxury ones. And same line refers to the wildest twist. Pieces made on the same assembly line, with the same materials by the same hands, just sold on the side. Quietly. How are people finding this stuff? Not on Amazon, not on eBay, but on Telegram groups, WeChat circles, private WhatsApp channels, invite-only forums where seasoned buyers trade factory contacts, build guides, and payment instructions. And yes, sometimes all it takes is crypto or a wire transfer to have a custom-built Daytona-style watch, 95% identical to retail, shipped to your door. We're talking sapphire crystal, 904L, stainless steel, ceramic bezels, automatic movements, not fakes. Just brandless twins. Some even go a step further. Buyers order a complete build, then source a real Swiss movement separately. Often ETA or sell it at calibers used in Swiss-made watches and install it themselves or through a trusted modder. The result? A timepiece that looks, feels, and functions like a $10,000 Rolex, but costs under $800. And the kicker? The factories don't care. They'll make a run of 10,000 cases for a Swiss brand by day, then do 2,000 extra on the side for private resellers by night. It's all money. And since the parts are technically unbranded, they avoid legal fire. This is no longer about counterfeits. It's about access, autonomy, decentralization. Buyers no longer want to beg a boutique for a watch. They want to build it themselves, with the exact same materials, without the markup, the wait list, or the corporate arrogance. And while luxury brands desperately cling to their image, this parallel market is exploding, driven by knowledge, transparency, and tech-savvy buyers who've realized the truth. You don't need a logo to wear a luxury watch, just a factory contact and a Telegram invite. Let's ask the question no one at Rolex, Omega, or Patek Philippe wants to answer. If a watch is made with the same parts, in the same factory, by the same workers, is it even a replica anymore? Because that's what's happening right now. And it's turning the watch industry inside out. See, this isn't about cheap knockoffs anymore. Not the clunky $20 fakes with quartz guts and plastic crowns. We're talking about watches built from leftover parts of real production runs. Let that sink in. When a Swiss brand orders 10,000 bezels from a factory in Shenzhen, the factory doesn't stop at 10,000. They'll quietly run 11,000, maybe 12,000. That extra inventory, it doesn't get tossed. It gets flipped. It enters what collectors now call the gray market. Not just unauthorized resellers, but unauthorized builders using authentic parts that technically weren't supposed to exist. Cases, dials, bracelets, crowns, even clasps engraved with the exact same fonts, same codes, same placements. The only thing missing is the paperwork. And sometimes even that gets forged by ex-industry insiders with a grudge and a printer. And here's where it gets even messy, eh? Some of these replica watches are so accurate, they pass authentication. Yes, even seasoned dealers and watchmakers have been fooled. There are forums full of horror stories. Buyers shelling out $8,000 for a mint condition Rolex only to find out 6 months later it's a Frankenstein build, using mostly real parts. Because if everything but the movement is authentic, what exactly are you buying when you buy a real watch? Brand loyalty? A serial number? A marketing story? Let's take it further. Some gray market builders go a step beyond the factory leftovers. They source Swiss movements, sell it to ETA, even real Rolex movements harvested from broken watches, and combine them with OEM Chinese parts to create timepieces that are functionally indistinguishable from the boutique product. So again, is that still a fake? Or is it just a watch that skipped the markup? This gray zone is where the industry is panicking, because it doesn't just erode sales, it erodes trust. Imagine dropping $12,000 at an official dealer, then spotting what looks like the exact same watch on someone's wrist, except they got theirs through a Telegram group for $900. You inspect it. The feel is the same. The heft is identical. Even the lume glows the same. Suddenly, you're not just mad, you're uncertain. What does real even mean now? Collectors are starting to second-guess everything. Was that vintage Daytona completely original, or was the bezel swapped out in 2012 by a restorer who bought his parts in Guangdong? Did that $30,000 Royal Oak have its screws replaced during service, with components not from Switzerland, but from a precision lathe in Dongguan? The truth is, even the brands can't always tell, because they've quietly relied on those same suppliers for decades, and now the supply chain has turned on them. So when someone asks, is it a replica? The better question might be, replica of what? Of a design made in the 70s, reissued 50 times? Of parts that are outsourced anyway? Of a myth that's been propped up by marketing more than metallurgy? Because if authenticity is just paperwork, and the watch itself is 95% identical, then the line between fake and real, it's not just blurry, it might be gone. Let's zoom out. We've been peeling back the layers of luxury watchmaking. The Chinese factories, the Swiss loopholes, the authentic replicas built from real parts. And yeah, it's shady. It's manipulative. It's a mirage sold at $15,000 a pop. But here's a question that cuts deeper. If we're going to talk about greed, if we're going to point fingers, why is all the outrage aimed at Rolex? Because when you really look at the numbers, the luxury watch industry isn't the greediest beast in the room. Not even close. Let's talk about profit margins. The Swatch Group, the parent company of Omega, Breguet, Longines, and others, reported a profit margin of around 18% last year. Not bad, right? But compare that to Apple, which rakes in margins north of 30%. And not just from phones, from watches, smartwatches. In fact, Apple Watch has quietly outsold the entire Swiss watch industry combined for years. It's made in China too, but unlike Rolex, Apple doesn't even pretend. No Geneva fairy tale, no handcrafted illusion, just a design in California, stamp slapped on a case built in Zhengzhou, boxed by the thousands every hour. Then there's Novo Nordisk, the pharmaceutical giant behind Ozempic and Wegovy. Their margins? Over 45%. That's right. A company that sells life-altering drugs is pulling profits more bloated than any luxury brand. And they're playing a much darker game, one where demand is driven by medical addiction, not craftsmanship or nostalgia. So again, who's the real villain? Is it Rolex selling you a mechanical watch for 10 grand because it spent decades building mystique? Or is it Silicon Valley pumping out digital wearables every year with planned obsolescence baked in, exploiting labor just the same, only without the romance? Let's not forget that Rolex isn't even a traditional corporation. It's owned by a private charitable foundation. It doesn't have shareholders screaming for quarterly growth. It doesn't IPO. It doesn't answer to Wall Street. Meanwhile, Apple is a $3 trillion behemoth whose stock price depends on constant expansion, pushing devices, mining your data, charging $30 for USB-C cable they removed in the name of minimalism. But which one gets framed as the out-of-touch status symbol? Which one gets dragged as the poster child of excess? It's time to reframe the conversation. Yes, the luxury watch industry has secrets. Yes, the supply chain is compromised. Yes, the Swiss-made label has been stretched to its limit. But let's not pretend that it's more evil than industries hiding behind screens and sterile white labs. At least Rolex still gives you a product that works 50 years later. Try saying that about your iPhone. Greed isn't just about the price tag. It's about how invisibly it's executed. Luxury brands may blind you with diamonds and gold. But big tech, they distract you with efficiency, convenience, and constant upgrades. And while you're busy dunking on someone's day just, Silicon Valley is quietly owning your data, your attention, and your time. So when we talk about systemic greed, when we ask who's robbing the public blind, let's not stop at the watch boutique. Let's point the lens toward the industries that no longer pretend to be human. Because Rolex may sell you a fantasy, but at least it's an honest one. Apple sells you a world where the watch checks your heartbeat, while they measure your loyalty minute by minute. You've seen the factories. You've heard the whistleblowers. You've watched the price drops, the media silence, and the whispers of parts smuggled from Shenzhen to Geneva and back. But now, let's pull off the final layer of polish. Because the most expensive luxury watch brand in the world is a non-profit. Yes, Rolex, the crown jewel of status, wealth, and high society, isn't owned by a billionaire or traded on the stock market. It's controlled by the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, a Swiss nonprofit. Sounds noble, right? Wilsdorf, Rolex's founder, set it up after the death of his wife. The idea was to protect the company from being broken up or sold, and, supposedly, to ensure that excess profits went toward charitable causes. But here's the twist. Almost no one knows where that money actually goes. Unlike U.S. nonprofits, which are required to disclose financials, Swiss foundations operate in near total secrecy. There's no public ledger, no breakdown of donations, no detailed list of philanthropic endeavors, just a vague statement about supporting science, education, and the arts. Yet the Rolex brand continues to rake in billions, with an estimated $10 billion in annual revenue and over $1 billion in profit every year. So where's it all going? That's the billion-dollar mystery. Some of it, sure, funds prize ceremonies like the Rolex Awards for enterprise or environmental campaigns. But most of it, it seems to vanish into a black box of private executives, real estate, and Swiss banking opacity. Let's talk about those executives for a second. Rolex's senior leadership is among the highest paid in the industry, despite being part of a non-profit. There are no shareholder meetings, no investor pressure, no quarterly earnings calls. Just complete autonomy and endless demand. And here's the kicker. Because of its non-profit structure, Rolex pays significantly less in taxes than a for-profit corporation of the same size. So not only are they not held accountable to shareholders, they're also not contributing back at the same level to the economy they're extracting billions from. That's the real magic trick. A Rolex Submariner retails for $10,000 to $15,000. But parts sourced from Chinese factories? Case, bracelet, dial. Those could cost a few $100s total. Even the movement, which is assembled in Switzerland, doesn't justify the markup when mass-produced at Rolex's scale. Let's break that down. Casing and bracelet, often made in Asia, as low as $150 in raw manufacturing. Movement assembly in Geneva, maybe $300 to $500 per unit in labor and parts. Packaging and logistics, another $100. Marketing and branding, probably the biggest cost, but it's all designed to keep the illusion alive. So what you're really paying for is not the craftsmanship. You're paying for the myth, for the marketing machine, for the power of secrecy disguised as tradition. And above all, for the cultural cachet Rolex has protected by hiding behind a charitable cloak. Because when the average person hears nonprofit, they picture soup kitchens, not submariners. They picture aid, not opulence. But in this case, the nonprofit is eating better than everyone else. They don't need to answer questions. They don't need to explain the price. And they certainly don't need to justify how a company with no shareholders still manages to maintain one of the most aggressive retail markups in modern luxury. That's the twist. The most successful luxury brand in the world isn't just manufacturing watches. It's manufacturing mystique. And it's doing it from behind the perfect cover. A crown worn not by a CEO, but by a foundation. A ghost. So the next time you glance down at a Rolex dial and see that familiar word, Swiss-made, ask yourself, what does it really mean? Because at this point, Swiss-made doesn't just mean origin. It means illusion. It means loopholes. And maybe it means you were never supposed to know.